A very good morning to everyone and welcome to WishwaTalks. My name is Trishan and I thank you all for attending today's event. For those of you who have attended a WishwaTalk before, a warm welcome back. And for those of you who are here joining us for the first time, here's a little bit about us. WishwaTalks is a space to expand the horizons of your mind. Every webinar we call experts from different domains to discuss and examine opinions, issues, problems, and perspectives. Each webinar is an interactive session where we walk away with more respect for each other and a deeper understanding of the topic at hand. If you miss a session, please visit our website or YouTube channel for a full library of past Wishwe Talks on interesting topics. We are delighted to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker for today's Wishwe Talk, Mr. Raghava Krishna, a seasoned professional with a remarkable career spanning 22 years. His journey has traversed the realms of both game development and academia, showcasing his profound expertise in creative product development, learning design, and organizational culture. During his tenure as development director at Electronic Arts EA Sports, he spearheaded product operations for EA's mobile game development studio in Hyderabad, making significant contributions to the gaming industry. Beyond the corporate world, he transitioned into the realm of public policy, co-founding Rashtraman School of Public Leadership. Presently, the co-founder and CEO of Brahat Culture Creatives and Brahat Educational Trust. His focus on cultural storytelling, Indic knowledge systems centered education, public policy, and leadership development underscores his commitment to holistic societal progress. His unique perspective, rooted in the Indian civilizational worldview, promises to provide invaluable insights into addressing global challenges. Get ready to be inspired by his wealth of experience and vision for a better future. Let's welcome him with enthusiasm and gratitude for sharing his invaluable insights with us. Before we get started, I'd like to inform our audience that our speaker will be taking questions from you after our main talk. So please leave your questions in the chat or use the raise hand tool, and we will allow you to ask your questions in person. I request everyone to turn on your webcam for interactive activities. Now, without further ado, I invite our speaker to begin today's Wishwa Talk. Namaskar, sir.
Namaste, Jayma, and thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for taking time out. What was interesting and also heartening to see in the short video that you just showed, Trishant, is that Vishwa believes in the confluence of culture, social, and the sacred. There is a place where the political, the social, the cultural, and the psychological meet, and that has to be governed by the sacred. And what I saw in the short clip is that it's one of those few organizations that does not look at things in a reductionist way. It is looking at the entire makeup of the society in a very integral kind of manner. So that talks very closely to us at Brahat, and what we are going to discuss today and have a conversation about in terms of Dharmic lens for modern life. It's a tall promise. I think we've made a few promises to our audience. What I also enjoyed leading up to this was the professional approach that you have to your conversations and how seriously you take your audience and respect their time. And that is actually the kernel. When we talk about Dharma, we sometimes have this image of esoteric, slightly abstract ideas. But Dharma is fundamentally behavior. And the behavior of respecting time, the behavior of respecting your audience's attention, and the behavior of having the discipline to lay out what to expect is an act of Dharma in the work that you're doing. And that is also the thrust of my conversation. You're able to hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. That is also the thrust of my conversation and what I'm going to present for the next 35 minutes is about how do we bring this abstract notion sometimes that we call Dharma into our everyday behavior, and how do we actually give ourselves some ways to think about our own existence that can be aligned with this macro idea called Dharma. But before we get there, before we talk about some of these grand things on culture, civilization, let me begin with a recent incident that was a moment of epiphany for me, because it taught me everything that I thought I understood about Dharma, but till till that insight sort of gathered, it didn't come together the way it did when I saw this. I think about 3 months ago now, or maybe 2.5 months ago, all of us were witness to a ghastly train accident in Balasore, Odisha. Right? About maybe 5, maximum 10 minutes, the entire train came tumbling down, and extraordinary loss of life. And you just can imagine something like that shocks the very fundamentals that you believe in. If life is so transient, it is so unpredictable, what are we talking about in terms of social change? Because this can be snuffed out any minute. So there was this moment of national tragedy, and obviously a bit of mourning and concern and just imagination. I'm sure for everyone who followed that news, it must have sparked the thought about our fundamental existence. And sometimes these moments clarify your purpose. Sometimes they cloud your judgment. But for the latter, when the judgment is clouded, when we are falling into something of a meaninglessness kind of existence, I'd urge you to look at what happened 11 days later. 11 days later, at the same site where the accident occurred, people from the nearby villages, we don't know the number, we don't know the details of what those villages were, but there was this news article carried out in all the leading newspapers that people came together and they offered Pitru Runa. They offered, the what we call the Shrad. And that ritual is a day-long ritual. And during the course of that ritual, they tonsured their heads, they offered their prayers, they gave sacrifices, and they prayed for the souls, or for the atmas of people who departed. Now, this movement is very poignant. It is a news item at the end of the day. But come to think of it, there was no state mandate for them to do that. There was no market incentive for people to come together organically. If we were to place ourselves in that situation, how many of us can reasonably claim that an idea like that would even enter our consciousness? How many of us can claim that when such an idea comes, we actually follow through? How many of us can actually say that we follow through and we are okay with the prospect of not having our hair for 2-3 months after having offered for somebody that we have never met, somebody that we don't even know? Now, what is that thing? What is that impulse, collective impulse, not just an individual impulse, not just a moment of inspiration, not just a transient emotion, but a collective conviction, a collective impulse, a collective action that propelled people to organically come together, regulate themselves, sacrifice their own happiness, sacrifice their idea of themselves for a while, and offer that oblation to somebody that they've never met. Now, if you start unpacking this, if you start understanding this, you get to the kernel of what we call the Bharatiya culture, or the idea of Dharma. Dharma, as Kapil Kapoorji is fond of saying, and I'm fond of repeating, is the one word unwritten constitution that our nation has had for over 5,000 years. Maybe well over that, but at least 5,000 years. This is one word. I'm sitting here in the southern part of India today. I travel all over India for my work now. Wherever I go, if I say Dharma, it is registered the same way. If I say Karma, it is registered the same way. If I say Runa, it is registered the same way. Now, this is magic. This is an absolute wonder that across the length and breadth of such a vast land, and we are never tired of talking about our diversity, and across such space-time continuum, we're talking about 5,000 years and we're talking about 2,000 by 1,800 square kilometers. You have these ideas that have been registered, internalized, transmitted, lived the same way. And this is getting, this is still getting response. And this is what has actually helped those people come together on their own and offer something that is precious to them for people that they've never met. Now, if you understand this and you juxtapose this with the kind of world and the crisis that we hear about today, I mentioned in my introduction note, or the title to this talk, that my perspective is to look at the global crisis from an Indic Dharmic lens, and see what are the prevailing thought paradigms, and how can Dharma metaphysics or Dharma culture help us bridge the gap, help us show the way. We are tired of the platitude around Vishwaguru, but that's because it's been framed fairly inadequately and only politically. There is a case for Bharat as Vishwaguru. That is why the rishis have used it. Rishi Vakya is not trivial. Now, if you were to understand this, you have to unpack what is happening in the world today. What is really happening in the world today? You have a climate crisis that is there, and within that, you have all kinds of political narratives. On one hand, you have the global capitalistic logic that says that this has just been hijacked by some loony leftists, and there is really no case for concern. But that is that is really that is funny in a way, because you don't have to read any theory to experience this. You can see it yourselves. You can just look at the soil quality index. You can look at the way oceans are being boiled. You can look at the data that comes from the species count and how we are going through a massive extinction. All of the science, which is verifiable, falsifiable, is telling us that there is a massive impact that we're having on environment. But the capitalistic logic, because of the cognitive dissonance that it has, if it has to contend with this, is not able to accept it. Is simply not able to say that, yes, we have a problem and that might require us to alter our lifestyles. The challenge is not so much with the technology rate, or the challenge is not so much with how we can create financial systems. The problem is that at some point, somebody's got to tell us that 10 billion people cannot have the American lifestyle, which means that you need to stop doing certain things. But the challenge is, how do you actually get comfortable in that idea of letting go? That doesn't seem to be a political problem. That doesn't seem to be a technological problem. That does not seem to be just an emotional problem. It is a cultural issue. It is an issue that has to link our personal idea of a good life with the culture that we create to cohabit and coexist with others. And that is at the nub of this issue. So we are looking at climate from that perspective. Think about war, right? We as this decade unfolds, we are likely to see greater events of turmoil. We're already going through a fairly big, prolonged, protracted war. What was essentially started as a regional schism is now engulfing pretty much the entire Europe, and with all the big powers in it. So it was never local, regardless of what the claims were when they initiated the action. It was never, the dispute might be localized. It could be about a territory within a certain geography, but it was never it was never without the interlocking of the great powers. So you see that we are also going through a war, which means that the economy is going to be impacted, which means that some of the lifestyles have to change, which means some of the essential supplies are going to be scarce, which means, again, we have to let go. Once again, we have this problem that we have a global culture and economy that runs on the idea of perennial consumption and perennial growth, but we are creating conditions that require us to let go. And this is a fundamental chasm that we have. And that leads to the kind of epidemic that you see in loneliness. You're seeing the entire mushrooming of the mental health industry. You're seeing the absolute commoditization of the human senses. And there's nothing short of this. What we're going through is really the colonization of our interiority. Colonization can happen of land. Colonization can happen by control over resources. But the ultimate colonization is when your sense-making apparatus itself is colonized. And what you and I are experiencing today is this invisible but all-pervasive force which has captured the way you make sense of your own life, which has captured the interiority that you have to guide your decision-making, which has captured the meaning that you give to yourself through the acts that you perform as your life, and whether or not they're aligned to a certain external logic. So if we were to decode the idea of multi-crisis and the role of Dharma and Dharmic cultures in this, if we are to look back at that behavior in that village in Odisha, where people came together on their own to do something for folks that they've never met, why did they do that? We talk about this as culture. And unfortunately, we've reduced culture also to some shibboleths. We talk about culture as food, culture as some kind of language, some kind of nice fantasy around dialects, nice sort of exoticization around dresses. But that is just the externality of culture. There is a deeper principle to culture. And the deeper principle to culture is about what is a meaningful life. What are the actions that govern the everyday life of a society? DVG says this beautifully. He says, when an object in nature is made sacred by an act of man, when an object in nature is made sacred by an act of man, that is culture. What have they done? In offering that tarpana to those that they've never met, they've actually lived their belief that there is a journey to the Atma. And for those who unfortunately experience a sudden death, sometimes in the belief of this land, in the metaphysics that governs their life, those journeys are impeded. And therefore, they took it upon themselves to facilitate the journey of that Atma to be liberated and carry on with its journey. Now, that is not provable by science. That is not verifiable in a laboratory. That is not generalizable as a theory. That is not measurable through lab experimentation. But yet, that is the truth. That is, nobody can deny the contentment those people experienced when they made an offering. Nobody can, and nobody needs to validate the kindness and joy that we experience when we do an act which is beyond ourselves. Nobody can deny the love of a mother. Nobody can, deny the experience, the subjective first-person experience that we have when we hold our own child in our hands. And yet, we have an epistemological challenge where, unless it is objectified, unless it is objective, unless it is measurable, there is a contestation around the truth claim itself. So this is the fundamental framing. You have a world that is generating crisis systematically. These are not accidental. There is a core that is generating the crisis, whether it is in oceans, whether it is in air, whether it is in soil, whether it is in your mind. There is something very fundamental that is generating this crisis. But at the same time, your means of learning, which is the human capacity, which is the only way that we can advance to actually solve the challenges that we are creating for ourselves. Your means of learning and advancing that learning for a shared understanding of life are inhibited because you have a certain epistemology that is not able to value the richness of the interior experience. And this is the fundamental challenge that we have, where we are divided internally, and those internal divisions is what we see manifesting as crisis amongst us. So if you have to challenge the notion that these are different disparate crises, if you have to, the Indian mind, particularly the Hindu metaphysics, it is a pattern-seeking mind. When faced with diversity or when faced with extraordinary complexity, it does not always go only element by element. There is a lot of empirical, rigorous thinking that Indian mind and Hindu mind has done, but there is also the ability to look at the sum total of this. That is why we get that question, what is that by knowing which that I can know everything else? So it is the ability to see things together as one and to grasp the fundamental philosophy, the essence, the tattva that has been harnessed in the Indian mind through the knowledge systems. So the case for the Dharmic culture, the case for Dharmic knowledge systems is an intellectual one as it is a moral one. It is a moral one because we are seeing the world suffer, because we've given ourselves some cruel choices. We've said that either you can have material growth or you can have spiritual abundance. Either, the choice that we've given to our young people today is that either you can chase Atta and Kama, or you can, you can have something about Dharma and Moksha. This is a fundamentally wrong setup. This is violence. We are governing our life systems through a wrong principle. And if we are to address this, you need to once again look at how knowledge is produced, how human beings learn, how we come together, and how do we engage in this conversation about what is really valuable, what is the value of value in life itself. That is the case for Dharmic culture. So if you look at this from the Western perspective today, they are talking about, they're also recognizing the chasm. They're also getting to this recognition or this acceptance and acknowledgement that the problems that they've created from a certain worldview cannot be solved by the same worldview. This is definition of madness, as Einstein said all those years ago. But they don't have an access to a lived tradition. they don't have access of something that they can mimic. They don't have the lived experience that can generate contentment. And this is the dialogue of knowledge systems that is happening in the world today. A lot of my work is in advocating the relevance of Indian knowledge systems as a system, as a compact, complete, and nourishing knowledge system that is relevant for the universe. That is why at Brihat we say Indian knowledge systems is a universal episteme. It is not a localized episteme because the fundamental interiority, whether you are in United States or whether you are in Papua New Guinea, it is the same. We are all challenged by the same expectations and same apprehensions. So knowledge also has a universal component to it, and so does the ability to understand, accrue, and transmit knowledge. So if we were to look back at this, we have a system that is generating crisis. We don't have the dominant civilization having the means to resolve those crises that it is generating. We have a living tradition, a living civilization where pro-social behaviors, where you are able to do things for others, seems to be organically embedded into everyday life in a population of 1.3 billion. That is clearly valuable as culture, as knowledge system, as a repository of decision-making support. And now what needs to happen is this interplay where we are able to examine the strengths and weaknesses of the paradigm, but rooted and absolutely grounded and absolutely convinced, 100% convinced about the value of our intellectual and moral inheritance. Look at this and try and provide a solution for all of these things together. So a lot of work that we do at Brihat is about this rich synthesis, is about looking at this. But if you were to do this, there is an intellectual component to it. It's not just about feeling good. There is a lot of hard intellectual labor that you need to put to understand what is happening. So this requires us to unpack the priors of the Western civilization. It requires us to look at what is the historical process through which these ideas have been generated. What is the impact of these ideas on the institutions they've created and the policies that come out of those institutions and the policies that govern you and I. Now, for example, I'll take a quick example of an experience that all of us have gone through. Just 2-3 years ago, we've all gone through the horrors of COVID, and we've been locked down. We've been asked to vaccinate ourselves. There are a lot of things that are otherwise considered extraordinary, in fact, considered to be draconian. The whole debate around individual liberty, freedom, all of that has been subsumed under this, macro panic situation that all of us had. Now, within that, if we were to track that news today, I don't know how many of you track the evolution of that COVID debate. There is clearly an acknowledgement now that this was not a random accident. There was a very highly sophisticated, sponsored research which was sanctioned by the institutions in America, the National Institute of Health, the CDC, the FDA, all of those scientific institutions which come together for the pursuit of science in the service of humanity, as we are told, have sponsored a gain of function research for a lab in China, interestingly. We're told that there are global rivalries between US and China, but on this research, somehow they came together. Now, this word and how words are weaponized is what I want us to get our attention to, because the process of reclaiming our position and our ability to make sense for ourselves begins with the word, begins with how we pay attention to the meaning and word association. Gain of function is a scientific term, and it is a research that is sort of sponsored, I'm told, where you're trying to understand if there is a certain act in nature which can actually help you leapfrog, right? Now, this is the explanation that was offered when there were questions raised about the origin of COVID. Very quickly, the entire scientific, technological, political establishment came down and they said, this is a gain of function research. When you and I hear about this word, gain of function, we automatically in our minds register that as something valid. We register that as something that is scientific because it sounds scientific. It is coming through a scientific institution. It is coming through with the sense of authority that they know what they're speaking about. And this is the true nature of our policy making today, that whoever can claim authority and whoever has institutional hegemony is able to just generate policy for the entire world. Now, if you and I were to ask, what is the function that you're looking to gain? What is this gain? And what is the end result of this function? Then you will get a different answer. you will get an answer that this was essentially a war effort. This function that they were looking to gain on is a strategic geopolitical advantage. Now we have to then question at what point in our history, because these are all developed nations with extremely sophisticated institutions of checks and balances, at what point in history did you lose your ethics? When did you trade your scientific temper for your ethical temper? If they come back and ask India that you don't have scientific temper, if that's the stick that they choose to beat culture with, when are we going to look back at them in the eye and ask them, where is your ethical temper? Who holds the accountability for the devastation that you caused? Who holds the accountability for all the loss, the livelihood loss, the lives loss, the loss of meaning? So this is not a abstract out there issue. This is an issue that impacts you and I every single day. It is just that it takes a little bit of intellectual work to unpack all the connections between your daily life and the institutions, the policies that come out of those institutions, and the knowledge systems that provide the back thrust for those policies and for those institutions to generate culture. So that is the first thing that we need to look at. Like, what is the institutional culture? What are the fundamental axioms that are informing the philosophy of that institutional culture? Now, if you agree that this is important, if you're able to see the gap that I'm trying to paint, then you will examine the foundations of the Western civilization. And this is not about random angst. This is not about a revolution. This is just about understanding. This is about a really critical scrutiny of the ideas that are being presented as the goals for the entire world. And if you unpack that and go into a little bit of history, you notice that this entire story probably began in the 16th and 17th century. They came out of what they themselves call the Dark Ages for 600 years, because most of the Western history was a fight for power between three principal forces: the monarch, the church, and the aristocracy. And across different points in time, each of them tried to co-opt the laity or the general public. If church had sway over the general public through its religious authority for some time, then church ruled. If the monarchs had more credibility, then they were able to subsume the power of the church for some time. If the aristocrats somehow managed to gain power over these two, they were able to extract concessions, which is in fact the story of Magna Carta. If you look at from Magna Carta to what is happening in democracy even today, there is a nice compact. There is a nice trade between classes of power, right? And this is also this is the story of the world that animates much of the Western and by extension the entire world today. That there are there is only the material idea of history. That history is a continuous conquest for power, or history is just an evolution of financial instruments and economic technology that we've created. The question is there a different story of history? Is there a different philosophy of history? Is there a different meaning that we can give to history? And to do that, to actually understand that, you need to understand what are the fundamental ideas that this history has produced. So when the Dark Ages ended and when Renaissance and followed by Enlightenment and the whole critical flowering of their faculties has happened, we've emerged with two or three new gods. They managed to, science had decisively won over religion at that point in history in the Western world. And science erected its own gods. And those gods are what we call freedom and reason. Right? We have to go back to the Descartes view. I think, therefore I am. There's a whole metaphysics to it. I'm not trying to belittle. In fact, he meant it in a whole systematic way. And he was also trying to get at the fundamental cognitive mechanism itself. So this attempt is not to reduce it to a comfortable, convenient narrative. But it is true at a broad level that the West emerged with the ideas of reason and freedom as the main ingredients of a global culture. And they have gathered tremendous success by deploying freedom and reason. So they gave themselves the ability to think freely, the ability to experiment, the ability to examine, the ability to conquer. And within that is embedded the core of the colonial logic, right? Because in the Hegelian spirit, if there was a progress of human thought through time, and the pinnacle of that was the European civilization at this juncture, Then the moral logic that his theory gave to the rest of the Europe is that it is incumbent on them. In fact, they are burdened to give all of us that civilization. Right now, this paradox that you have emerged out of one hegemony with the idea of reason and freedom and human spirit as the fundamental ideals of a good society. But at the same time, you somehow birthed, not just birthed, but also engendered, advanced, and entrenched colonial logic using the same ideas. This shows that there is a fundamental vacuum in what the civilization has produced. And if you unpack that, then you will see the entire root cause for the crisis that we have, which appears different, but actually is just monocausal once you pare it down. Now, think about the ideas of freedom and reason. Now, what is this freedom that they've discovered? There's a lot of debate within that. Sartre talks about existentialism. There is, of course, Descartes. There's a lot of debate within the Western civilization around what is the nature of freedom. Nietzsche, of course, had his own ideas around it. But fundamentally, when it comes to the element of informing culture and guiding the actions of everyday life, what happened is that this freedom just meant one thing. This freedom meant the freedom to. And the freedom to is the freedom to say anything, the freedom to consume anything, the freedom to go anywhere you want, the freedom to own everything, the freedom to infinity through the material exploration. That is the freedom that their engagement with reason gave them. And why is that? Because I think, therefore I am. That is my fundamental experience. And because I'm capable of thinking and capable of reason, I will make reasonable decisions. And because I'm capable of reasonable decisions, I need to have infinite freedom to exert infinite choice to actually gain what I want out of my life. That is the axiomatic truth of that civilization. Now, just examine this a little bit more. Now, you use reason to gain freedom, and you make the argument for freedom as freedom to consume, freedom to engage, freedom to indulge. And through that, you get into a sensory overload. You get into a situation where your experiences and your craving for experiences just keeps increasing exponentially. There is something missing there. If you're really free, you actually need to be free from this kind of craving. You need to be free to actually let go. You need to be free to say no. Somehow there seems to be a paradox that you've deployed reason and you've used the economic logic of the baker who is self-interested, which then generates utility for everyone. But you use that utilitarian logic to produce drugs, to produce a society that is nearing 50% divorce rates. The very fundamentals that civilization has been built on for thousands of years has now been put into jeopardy because you have this notion of infinite freedom. So what is really missing here? What is missing, if you were to ask from a dharmic lens, if human beings were capable of this reason, if we are such extraordinary beings, who need infinite freedom, why are we not able to handle ourselves? Now, if you think of it, it feels like there is a vacuum. There are, in fact, two central gaps in that. One is about the sacred. One is the idea of something divine, something beyond the human sense itself, which is, of course, which has been relegated to the matter of religion. And because science cannot discuss religion in the West, they have that chasm. But even within freedom and reason, there is a fundamental theory of mind and self that is missing. You're not able to recognize that you are, at the end of the day, a physical constitution, a mental constitution, an emotional constitution, a psychological constitution. And whatever acts you engage in affects all of this. If you're going to use your freedom to chase sensory experiences in infinite ways, then that has a fundamental impact on this apparatus called your physical body. It has a very negative impact on this psychological formulations that you have, because it doesn't seem to give you freedom. It actually traps you into more bondage, because mind, at the end of the day, is not satisfied by just one experience. And why is that? Here, if you were to look at it from the yogic lens, this is the praxis that the Indian civilization has, which is the missing link between their moral goals and the human constitution. You can all have moral goals, that is fine. But unless you have a theory of reality that is tied to your physical, emotional, psychological existence, you're not going to actually have results of this moral imagination. You're in fact going to cause more damage. What is the fundamental theory that yoga gives us? It is very basic. The ancients in India are extremely pragmatic as much as they are abstract. They look at your constitution and say you are fundamentally certain elements. Right? In Ayurveda, you can say something in Tridosha. In yoga, you can say sattva, rajas, tamas. All of these things, depending on what your starting point is. And that is also the beauty of Indian knowledge systems, that it does not matter where you start from. You can start from Vedanta, you have to get to yoga. You can start from Ayurveda, you have to get to yoga and Vedanta. You can start from all of this, then you realize that Nyaya is in fact the grammar to understand all of these things. You can look at all of these things, but to understand the specific, you need to go to Vaiseshika. So you look at the compact and the integrality of this knowledge system, regardless of where you start from. Over a period of time, if you're sincere, you will get to it. But what does yoga tell us? Yoga keeps it very basic. It says that you have sense organs. I'm not even going to the non-organs, right? You talk about your 5 senses. What is happening as a lived reality every single second of your existence? These organs are going out into the world. They are coming into contact with objects. Even as you hear right now, this is an object. You're listening to this, right? And they relay the data back to you. All of this data from the sensory object interaction is being relayed back to you. Now, when this information reaches back, the first thing that happens is that there is a registry of an I. There seems to be something called I that registers this. And the entire existential inquiry in the Indian tradition is, what is this, right? And then when they make this inquiry, they go into the depths of this. At the first level, there seems to be the outer sheath of just raga and dvesha. The first registry of this data is, I like it, I dislike it. I like it, I dislike it. Constant, incessant labeling of all your experiences as your likes and dislikes. This is registering at the aham level, the ego level, loosely translating. But there also seems to be an emotion that we attach with it, right? There is something deeper in us, which is what we call the idea of manas, the idea, the seat of emotions, where we know that is the truth, right? Like we discussed about the mother's love, there is no other validation required for that. There is a seat of emotion within you that is able to tell you about that experience. But the Indian inquiry does not stop there. It says there is something else called buddhi, which is the discriminatory intelligence. All your likes are not good for you. All your dislikes are not necessarily something that are bad for you. There are things that you like and you should stop doing. There are things that you dislike and you should do more of. That is the discriminatory intelligence of knowing how to exercise your freedom. Your freedom is not freedom if you're just going with a compulsive loop of your likes and dislikes. Your real freedom is the ability to discern which of my likes aids my well-being, which of my dislikes also aids my well-being. Only take those and discard the rest. So this is the buddhi. And then, of course, the deep root of all of these things, where all of these experiences are stored as memories. I'm sure there are some yoga experts in the audience. They can give us more clarity. A very functional, basic understanding is that this is the seat of your memories. And all you're doing is replay your memories and replay your samskaras. All you're doing is the minute the sensory data comes in, it registers, it taps into some kind of latent samskara, you end up chasing that. How many times does this happen to any of us? You go into a place, you get a smell, automatically it triggers a memory, and you want that experience. You want to actually have that, right? And by then, you're not a conscious being. You're essentially a compulsive person. You're just chasing that because you want to rekindle, re-trigger that emotion, that that happiness, that transient thing that you felt at that time, which is life, which is okay, which is fine, because all of us have to have these beautiful experiences. But the process of this experience generation, what the West thinks as freedom, is actually not freedom, because it is a compulsive loop of raga and dvesha. So what is happening here is that they have a theory of reason, a theory of freedom, and they've used that theory of and reason and freedom to produce extraordinary success materially, but the mind is still not settled. Contentment is still distant. Happiness and harmony is elusive. That is because there is a fundamental architecture to yourself, which is different to the theory of reality that you've given to yourself, right? That challenge is what the yogic praxis is able to help us understand. Now, the genius of this civilization, so far we've looked at what is the idea of pro-social behaviors, what is the link between knowledge systems and culture and therefore behaviors, what is the history and historical experience that generates ideas of knowledge and truth, what is the Western idea of truth and knowledge, what is the yogic critique of that truth and knowledge, and how can we register this? Now, the genius of this land is that it did not just stop there. It did not end with philosophical, intellectual inquiry. The reason those all the people in the villages have come together for the train accident in Balasore and offered the 11th day ritual is not because they understand yoga, Vedanta, Nyaya, Vaiseshika. No. They came there because for them, it's a daily lived thing. This is an unparalleled intellectual, cultural achievement across any civilization at any time. That there is no gap between the ideas and your daily existence. That is the very definition of a lack of stress-free life. If you really understand the process of stress, stress is nothing but what you claim to be and what you are. The gap between your external saying and your internal being. And that is being generated systematically because they're putting the aham, they're putting the raga dvesha on steroids by incessant economic production. And you are not refining the instrument to deal with that. You only have finite capacity, you are overloading it, and you're somehow expecting that this will manage. It does not manage. It is fractured within itself, and therefore the culture is also fractured. But here in the Indian civilization, this is an integral civilization that first focused on refining and elevating the instrument, the mind, body, energy complex, so that it can then look at all the choices that the culture, the civilization is producing, and then say, this is good to this extent, this is good in this context, this is bad in this context. That is why Dharma is simultaneously the universal, the contextual, and the personal. There are three elements that make Dharma, because the same decision that you and I take might not be the same judgment. It is a function of what is the context. It is a function of what is the universal, the Samanya Dharma, the Vishesha Dharma, and the Chetana, and the consciousness through which you're able to act. All three have a role to play in the decision making. And here in the Western civilization, there's only the universal episteme. There is no space for context. There is no place for consciousness. And that is the challenge that you are having. And if you look at this as the Dharmic culture, which is able to bring the high philosophy into everyday life, and if you really generate that wonder in yourself about your own history, about the reality of Bharat and why this continues to exist for over 5,000 years without generating this multi-crisis at 1.3 billion people, right? How did they actually not reach this multi-crisis? It is because they've given themselves ideas of life which are tethered to reality. And there, the civilization, so if that is a culture, there is a certain institutionalization of these ideas that has given us this civilization. Culture is a set of values that we learn through socialization. There is a process of meeting, knowing, sensing each other and the environment through which culture develops. If I say this, it is only decodable in this audience. If I say this in a culture that does not understand this, that I am going down to you, I know this is Purusha, this is Prakriti, we are coming together, you and I are the same. Unless we are able to understand this, even if you don't understand the high philosophy, you're able to know that this is a mark of respect. This is a mark of greeting. But cultural sense making, if it doesn't have that, then this has no meaning, right? But there is a way in which cultures become civilizations. And that is why it's important to understand the Dharmic lens from a civilizational perspective. Bharat has created three fundamental institutions for the culture of this truth to actually spread all over the world. Now, if you were to ask that question that we raised earlier, how is it that the word dharma, karma, rana, or any of these ideas that you have, across such diversity of language, terrain, food habits, whether it is the ocean culture or whether it is the hill culture, How is it that these words brought this land together and people together? And there is a beautiful example that comes to us about the difference in the Indian civilizational making as opposed to the nation state sort of idea that you have today. And Kapil Kapoorji talks about this, about a 10th century poem. How was this land or this culture formed? The prince of literature married the princess of poetry, and together they went on a walk. And as long as they could travel and spread ideas, that became one Desha. Look at the beauty of this. This is not on one skin color. This is not on one language. This is not on one caste, regardless of what some people try to tell us. This is not on the basis of one creed. It is on the basis of some ideas that are deeply personal, but extraordinarily universal. Space-time continuity only happens for an idea, particularly, for any idea, for any culture, only when these two things are coming together. It has to be personally true, because unless you and I experience it, we are not going to subscribe to it. Clearly, nobody is going to subscribe to it over such a long period of time. But at the same time, it also has to be universal so that I can communicate it and you can understand it as your own experience. So this combination of the deeply personal and the universal expressed as ideas, which has come to us as culture, has been institutionalized to give you and I a civilization. And the three institutions that have come together in this, the first institution is the institution of family. This is the emphasis on the family that has held the Indian civilization together. This is the master institution that they've created, because all science also tells us now that you inherit cultural and genetic makeup. It is both. It is co-evolution of both these things. And the learnability, the ability to learn for human beings, happens in a space where these things come together. So all of our learning, fundamental human learning, fundamentally happens in families. And that is why that was an extraordinarily productive system, where the family and the profession was tied. The second institution that they created for you and I is the Gurukula. The knowledge system, all the things that we spoke about as Darshana, the Vedanta, the Shed Darshana, the knowledge systems is the institution. Just think about this. Walk down the street in any place in India. If you have a temple nearby, you will hear recital. And they are saying the mantra the same way, in the same intonation, with the same words that it was said in 5,000 years ago. There is no digital technology. There is no transfer. There is no RAM. There is no internet wire transfer. There is nothing. They've made use of the technology that we have as humans. And they found that certain natural patterns of repetition, when you practice, is the best way to store content and replicate it without a fault. And that sound fidelity, what we call mantra of those divine sounds, has been transmitted for over 5,000 years with the greatest pedagogy. Today, we hear this as mind, heart, and hands. But if you look at the central pedagogy principle of Bharat, they talk about 3 levels of learning. They say that some of us can understand concepts, principles. That is called the Prabhu Samhita. For those who understand concepts, they will give concepts. That is the sutra. But not all of us can understand concepts. In fact, all of the philosophical truth was already available to us by the time of Upanishads. Why did the civilization create Itihasa Purana then? Why Mahabharata? Why Ramayana? Why all of this? Why all the Sthala Puranas? Because human beings are absolutely intertwined with storytelling. We only learn and remember stories, not so much the principles. So they storified this. That is called the Mitra Samhita. Look at the beauty of that word. Teaching like a friend. Teaching like somebody who is able to talk to you as a story that is your own, which is also the work that we try to do at Brihat. We want to be the Mitra Samhita for culture, for everyone. But then also realize that some people are so stubborn that they will not listen to even friends. They don't understand principles. They're not as smart as they think they are, but they are foolish enough to also not listen to friends when they say good things. They only listen when they are in love and the beloved asks them something. So they said, we created the Kanta Samhita, the poetry and everything else that is, making you feel good about yourself, to generate that Sahridayata in you so that you are capable of refining yourself. Through this institution of Gurukula, where the Guru is the institution and the pedagogy is this 3-pronged pedagogy, they managed to transmit all of these values into our fundamental core, into our being. And they brought it one institution, all of these things together. Because remember, culture is a process of socialization. It is not just by our individual learning experience that we create a culture. It is only when you and I come together into a space respectfully that we can create culture. It is in the temple, in the place of worship, that they created and brought all of these things together. Temple is simultaneous the land administration. It is the place where your marriages are performed, the social functions are performed. It is the Gurukula, where the gurus and the Sishyas meet. It is the place for religious gathering. It is the place for mystical music. It is the place for spiritual solidarity and spiritual practice. They created this space for all of us to get into this. And if you were to just examine one act of your own behavior, you will understand what the magnitude and magnificence of this is. All of us in Bharat, regardless of which religion, which caste, generally speaking, you will have a space in your homes or in your offices that you allocate for the sacred. There's something that you create which is sacred. You are the same person in the rest of the space, in your house or in your office. And you examine your own behavior, your own language, your body language, your sense of entitlement in that space, your sense of dominance and ownership over that space. And you then move into this space that you allocated for sacred. And you see what happens and what transpires within you. We notice that within ourselves, we don't need any other external validation. We become conscious. We become aware of something that is greater than us. We become more pro-social. We become calmer. What they've done is they've created such kind of space everywhere in this vast land for you and I. We actually created the sacred space for all of us to socialize. It is through the cradle of that sacred that we can socialize. You cannot socialize and create sacred. That does not work. Because if you and I socialize, we are more likely to only talk about things that feed into our ego. The civilizational design was to create this sacred space through which you and I, when we socialize, not just have fun, but also transcend. So that is the way. If you are to deal the multi-crisis and understand the dharmic lens, we have to sacralize spaces, we have to sacralize relationships. And ultimately for all of us, if we are to understand Dharma, like I said at the beginning of this, the kernel of Dharma is respecting each other and respecting everything that is there in us. So respecting ourselves, what nature has given us, respecting the relationships that we build with each other, always giving more than what we take in any situation, with yourself, with others, with nature, with just these three elements. Are you giving yourself more than what you take with your body, with your mind, with your emotion? Are you giving more than what you take in your relationships? Are you giving more than what you take with the nature? If we are able to answer this question personally, and if all of us have a positive balance, that is a regenerative economy. That is a regenerative world. And that regenerative world is the only way that all of us will survive. So dharmic lens is the ability to regenerate faster than the rate of entropy. I'll stop here. I hope that made some sense. And I hope the runas that I have gathered by getting your time today, I was able to repay this through some conversation and look forward to questions and interaction. Prashant, over to you.
Thank you, sir. It was, I can't believe it. I mean, I'm just filled with so much information right now, and I don't think anybody could have done it better. This topic is so pertinent and so important for present times. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. I'd like to now call upon Vishwa's founder, Shivani Munapudi, to take the session forward and initiate the Q&A. Namaskar, ma'am.
I would now like to request the audience to take 30 seconds to answer a poll for us. The purpose of this poll is to help us understand you a little better so we can better curate the topics that we bring to you. You can also let us know in the chat box how you found out about WishwaTalks. If you are a WishwaTalks subscriber, heard about it through friends or family, or found about the event on social media. Now, I would like to express my gratitude to each of you who have joined us today, because this was a very evolved topic, not something that you can take like most of our topics like the palliative care and all. This is more about evolving yourself culturally, philosophically. So it requires a certain amount of evolving to even participate in this session. Thank you so much. And we'll be looking forward for your questions, so that please put them in your chat box or raise your hands. I now extend my gratitude to our respected speaker, Mr. Raghav Krishnaji. One so young, you had so much to say, and I experienced that this one session was not enough to cover everything that you had to say. Actually, you crammed in a lot of things, and you tried to fill it within the 1 hour that we were taking to complete this session. Thank you so much. It is a topic which is much needed in our country, especially Westerners have no clue about their identity, have no understanding about the heritage that they have received from their ancestors. You have so beautifully and so simply put the whole thing together. I can't express my gratitude enough for what you are contributing. Yeah, and I would also like to thank the Wishwa team for such a lovely presentation of webinars. You all are doing a great job. Thank you so much to each of you. Trishant, for handpicking up such lovely topics, pertinent topics, because Wishwa works towards bringing in social change. It works towards protecting our heritage. Thank you so much to the entire team for organizing this very well. I would now like to talk about the upcoming talks before we go into the question and answer session. Preeti, could you put up the next upcoming talks? Yeah. Dr. Sandeep Sundepi, consultant psychiatrist and de-addiction specialist. He's coming from Asha Hospital, Banjara Hills. The topic is addiction, a brain disease or a choice. The date is 30th September 2023, 11 a.m. There was one participant who had attended the Montessori session, and she was very keen that we come up with a topic on de-addiction. And that's why on the request of one of the participants, we're coming out with this topic. We have the next session. It's by Mr. Sudhir V.S. He's the lead partner, chartered accountant, organization HNA and company LLP. The topic is GST simplified. Date and time is 7th October 2023, 11 a.m. Lastly, please take a moment to subscribe to Wishwa Talks to get alerts on every new and exciting talk, exclusive events, and access to the Wishwa community. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn for future updates. We also request, because ours is a platform where we're working on bringing in social change. So I want each of you to share with your friends and family about the upcoming talks at Wishwa. So coming back to our question and answer session, you have some acknowledgements from Shah Jahanapur. It's a company's name. It was a great session, great evolution of thoughts. Then there is a statement made here by Ms. Uma Vishwanathan. There seems to be an explosion of this topic, but more from the platform of branding and marketing. A couple of examples.
I think that was in reference to the mental health and addiction.
Okay. A couple of examples helped understand our responsibility, a hint to help us filter the noise requested. So we've noticed one very beautiful thing that you have told us is about in India that, see, I cannot be as articulate as you are. So I talk to you as a common person. So you said all the philosophy, all the spirituality, all the knowledge has been simplified in India, and it has become a way of existing, a way of practicing our daily life. Yeah. This is something the next generation doesn't even understand.
Because we've lost access to our knowledge systems. We haven't, once your means of knowing is lost through some colonial experience or whatever we have as education system today, then the downstream impact of that is that culture is trying to fix something which the institutions are producing systematically. So there's a problem, absolutely yes. But the blame is not with the youngsters. I'm saying that we have some cultural transmission systems that have been broken.
So now with the Gurukuls missing and the schools even run by the Hindus, even as simple as putting a yoga class is objectionable to them because they don't want to be identified as BJP oriented or, I don't know whether it's a right wing or left wing you call it. They don't want to be associated. How do you think the next generation is going to get what you're saying? Because this is a part of our DNA. I mean, our parents knew it. Probably I got a little bit of it, but my children have no clue about this.
Yeah, that's a challenge that all of us face. I started doing what I do because I'm a parent. I have my own daughter. And as a parent, I understand the challenges of this. So the entire inquiry began after I became a father. It's not a trivial challenge. We are definitely struggling here. And that's also the work that we do. But once again, here we need to understand how do we solve this by looking at culture as it is today. Today, if you look at it, and I worked in game development for a long time, so my experience is also towards design and art and how things are created for engaging people. It is very clear that we are going through a global culture now, which is very performative. What we mean by this is that we will do things not necessarily because they're right or wrong. But if they appear or if they give me a chance to feel good about myself and tie that to something good, right? So that is why you have this phenomenon where a lot of people are marching on the road, for a cause, but they might not understand enough about that cause or the history or the critical examination of that cause. So because of the social media exponential tech that we've created, particularly in the last 15 years, the performative and the sharing dimension is much more than the knowing dimension. That is simply there. That is the truth that we need to deal with. So that is why at Brihat, we say we are focused on three things. We first want to get to people where they are. If you're going out in the world, we want to give you a map. If you're coming back after getting lost, we want to light the path and give you some guidelines. And how do we do this? We do this by trying to help you understand about your own culture in ways that you haven't thought about. That your fundamental concern about feeling good, about having an identity, about a sense of belonging, is what your culture is also giving you through the story of Rama, through the story of Krishna, through the story of Ravana. It is helping you understand what will really get you what you want. But that has to be told in a personable manner. Today, if we are basically what's happening at a high level is we were always experience-centric civilization. We created experiences. So if somebody were to just go and immerse themselves in cold water bath and then walk up the steps of a temple, they will know that emotion themselves. Nobody else needs to validate for them. But today, if you ask them, they will first ask, what is the use? Why should I do it this way? Why is it not that way? That is because education is investing in our cognitive dimension, in our analytical dimension, in our logical dimension. So the questions come first, which unfortunately obfuscate the experiences. So we'll have to recreate those experiences through stories. Once that is done, that is still not enough. Because even if I experience it in myself, unless culture reciprocates, it's not going to stay. And for culture to reciprocate, you need policy. And for that policy to happen, you need to have knowledge systems. So our second part of our work is in entrenching Indian knowledge systems in education. If you are able to know the way of our own culture, then we are self-regulated. To do all of this, you need human potential. That is leadership. So our third pillar is civilizational leadership. We've talked about business leadership. We've talked about political leadership. But there is something called a civilizational leadership of looking at all of these things together. And that is the work that we do.
Is your foundation coming out with some workshops which is age related so that you can impart the same knowledge that you have said as per the age to the children?
Yes, so we work with other partners who are also involved. In fact, one of our partner organizations, the Vedic Pond, They tell stories, bedtime stories to children across all, people from all over India and also abroad. They tell stories from our Itihasa and Purana as bedtime stories. This has become a challenge. And this challenge is because we are not living with our grandparents anymore. The job or the function or the transfer that used to happen through grandparents and grandchildren living together, that is not there anymore. So we are having to create alternate institutions that are at least able to try and fill in a little bit. You can never replace that, but you're able to at least say that this is a story. So we partner with other organizations to create not just workshops, but also storytelling, school curriculum, and experiences. Our focus is at the thought level and higher education, where Indian knowledge systems needs to be deployed. But we partner with all of our collaborators for the school and primary education.
So when you said partner with for stories, which organization are you partnering with?
It's called the Vedic Pond. If you go to brihat.in and if you go to the website, at the bottom you will see.
I just wanted to share. I'm aging, but I get up in the morning at 6:45 and I go to my daughter's house. I have 3 grandsons and I give them massages and I tell them stories.
Wonderful. Because
I don't stay with them.
That is cultural transmission.
Because I can't tell them bedtime stories in the night. So I tell them in the morning.
In the morning.
And then I see my daughter bringing in a lot of Western books.
Yeah.
And I see the children talking about Iron Man and Spider-Man and God knows what men. But what I've understood is there's a lot of violence that comes from those stories.
Yeah, there's a different kind of value system. Yes.
Totally. Then I talk to him about Hanuman. I tell him, hey, listen, Hanuman also felt sad. He's strong, but he's also facing his weak times.
Yes.
It's because I'm able to talk about these with my grandsons to understand a human cannot be strong like an Iron Man all the time.
Yes.
So I'm doing this, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because what you have shared with us today there's too much that you have shared. And I think it's imparted little by little to the children. And I'm really looking forward for your curriculums so that, and even if it's available online, I would like to pick it up to share with my family members.
Absolutely. We are also creating a catalog of all the institutions that are working on this. We don't look at ourselves just as one organization trying to do this. We want to be the force that is able to help all of our organizations spread culture. So I'll share that information also with you, Shivani.
Sure. Our next question is from Ms. Sunita Rajiv. Yes.
Namaste, Sunita ji.
Holding the computer from one hand, so namaste. Radhaji, we are awestruck with your brilliance and thinking. The processing happened after reading and learning. So as Ashok Arora ji, one famous speaker once said, either you spend 10,000 hours in the library or you spend 10 minutes with a person who has been to that library. So I think today we just did that. My question would be very simple, that you gave an excellent analogy of this Odisha train accident and how villagers came up and proved themselves and how they really answered their own inner conscience. Whenever we face dilemmas of dharma, what is a question that one should ask oneself so that the answer comes clearly to oneself? That is one my question would be. Just in this strain, because you said about Mitra Sabhita, which I've noted down, I'm a storyteller and I told the stories of the saints of India and the heroes of India, and I narrated in Kahani in my YouTube channel. So that is where I'm going to follow you and not leave you. So please look forward to answering that question, how to answer that dilemma.
Wonderful. Just one thing, because it'll be inauthentic of me if I don't clarify this. Whenever I answer these questions, I answer this not as somebody who knows or who practices this. I answer this from a place of vulnerability. I answer this as somebody who's just an aspirant. For knowing really about Dharma, we need to look at gurus. We need to look at people who have that achara. I don't yet have the full achara, but I have definitely reflected on this because I'm speaking about it and I hold myself accountable. So the principle is the surplus generation, the way I understand it. Are you able to create that surplus? So one thing that you need to ask yourself is my action going to take or give? And at multiple levels, not just at the immediate level, but also at the secondary and third level, right? Particularly if you're running an organization, if you're responsible for something else. The more you're able to ask yourself this question. Another way of thinking about this is what we call sustainability, right? Like what happens, one thing that that is useful as critical thinking for Dharma is you ask yourself, if everybody else were to do what I'm doing, will it sustain or will it vanish? If you know that, so only thing, if everybody, and if these things are linked, right? If everybody is taking, then things won't be there. The reason we take while knowing this, like the Duryodhana dilemma, it was not like Duryodhana did not know that he was doing wrong. Like he tells Krishna, but this is so pleasurable that I'm not able to stop myself from doing it, right? So there is a Duryodhana in all of us. Just as there is Krishna and there is Arjuna, this is the truth. There is this in all of us. What we can do to turn the Duryodhana more into Dharmaraja is to ask, like how Dharmaraja answered Yaksha when he said, which of your dead brothers do you want me to bring back to life if only had one? And he chose the son of the second one, right? Because my mother has me. That mother, if will lose both her sons. That is Dharma, right? That is the idea of sustainability at multiple levels. He did not talk about who is my favorite or what is most relevant for my war. He did not say Arjuna or Bhima. He said, which mother has lost and how do I reconsider? So these questions, when they become behaviors, this is how the knowledge, reflection, and how that informs behavior. So if you ask yourself, if my action is replicated by everybody else around me, will this thing exist? Will I be happy about it? Or if you ask yourself, will this action of mine lead to giving or taking? Do I have a surplus relationship with all the things that I'm generating? If we are able to answer that in a positive, then I think that is the Dharmic way.
Yeah. To add to this, I wanted to ask, you told there were 3 levels of learning. Sutra, then you said it's about
The story.
Samhita.
Yeah.
And then what was the third thing you said?
So there is the Prabhu Samhita, which is the sutra of the conceptual understanding. The Mitra Samhita, the friendliness, which is the Itihasa Purana. And then there is the Kanta Samhita, the learning that you have through the person or the object that you love.
Can you
Poetry
explain
is seen
Kanta
as that.
Samhita? Can you
Kanta
explain?
Samhita is all the performative arts. We are likely to learn more from poetry and dance because it appeals to the intrinsic aesthete in us. It's not talking to us morally. It is talking to us performatively. So that's why they develop the arts. Yeah, that's why they develop the arts and the poetry and all of that, so that it can engage you first. And through that engagement, it can transform you.
So, and Prabhu Samhita is more about education.
The Shastras, the principles, and the...
It's more in the written form.
It could be written or it could be oral sutras, but it's precise. It's brevity is the hallmark of that.
Okay. Our next question is from Shmuel Erushalmi. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah, hello. I want to ask you a question about social aspects of Dharma. And I want to ask you how Dharma can support effective resolution social problems and problems of social inequality.
Yeah, I think that's a central concern. So Dharma is simultaneously, like I said, Dharma is the one word unwritten constitution of this civilization, which is the same link between your individual function and how that links to the social function. So how can Dharma help us be socially cohesive? The logic is very simple. Cohesion is not a function of moral sermon. It is not a question of trying to philosophize. Social cohesion is a behavioral function. And that behavior is guided by what I think is the good life for me. So my individual action necessarily has to generate social cohesion. In the Western world, economics is given that function, where if I act in my rational self-interest, I am generating social welfare. Then the theory breaks down because it is also established very well by now that we don't make choices rationally. We actually, most 95% of our choice making is governed by impulse, emotional impulse, or other kinds of non-rational choices or non-rational things. Dharma ties your fundamental need for morality with a behavior. And one of the ways this is done, for example, at a social level, is that we are all given 5 debts. Nobody talks about in the Indian civilizational classical thought, you are not born with rights. It's not the rights that take precedence. Your rights are a function of somebody else performing their duties. Only when somebody performs a duty, they create a right for you. And that is why the focus was on what we call the Pancharana. We are born into 5 debts. You have a debt to your ancestors. You have a debt to the rishis or the people who've given knowledge. You have the debt to your devas, Devaruna, which is the gods or whichever theology you believe in. You have a debt to the biosphere, all the animate and inanimate things around you. And you have a debt to all the Nara, which is the humans around you. You have these 5 debts. Your job is to repay these 5 debts. You have to repay debts to ancestors by doing certain rituals. You have to repay your debt to your learned rishis or traditions who've given you knowledge by learning and passing it on to your children, to your gods by performing sacrifices, to the humanity by contributing, and to biosphere by preserving it. So this is the social function, where each of us is asked to repay these debts to each other. And by repaying these debts, they create a high trust culture. That is the way Dharma guides social behavior.
I wanted to add, Shmuel, in India, in the olden village system, which now because of certain facilities not available, a lot of the people from the villages are moving into the cities. But if you see the traditional village system, if a family has a baby, it could be in a hut, it could be in a palace. The way the baby is taken care is the same. The same oil from nuvulo, til, is used to give a massage. The same flour is used to scrub. The same food is given to everybody. If you see in the villages, especially I'm from the south, and I see in the southern villages, the food that is cooked from the people in the hut to the people in the palace is the same vegetables in the same way. So in terms of food, in terms of living habits, you may be living in different kinds of homes, but the quality and the style of life has been the same. And not only has it been the same, it is not a burden on nature.
Yeah.
So your question was on social inequality. And what I understood from what Raghavji has told is that in India, all this philosophy is a way of life. It's practiced in the daily way of life. So in the daily way of life, there's actually no social inequality, especially in the villages. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure, but.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, all right. So the next question I have is, you have told that there are 3 fundamental institutions.
Yeah.
One was, I was a little confused because you said dharma, karma, and at the same time you said family and all. So I just wanted a little clarity on that.
So the institution, dharma, karma are the principles. The institutions, basically what is institution? Institution is where the principles are manifested into action and they have the ability to self-replicate and be transmitted. So if dharma, karma, rana, tapas, yajna, all of these are the ideas or the principles, what are the ways in which these ideas are transformed? Just the way you have given example, in the family, the grandmother, passing on these stories to the grandchildren is the way the value, the cultural value is transmitted, preserved, and then carried on. So the first master institution is the family. The second institution is the Gurukula or the knowledge system, where the Guru is at the center. The third is where all of these things come together and meet the larger society and other elements of society, which is the temple.
Okay. And the three principles were Dharma, Karma, and?
So it's not just three, that is just a subset, but Rita, Satyam, Rita, Brihat. Well, that's one of the reasons why we also call ourselves Brihat. Rita is, in history, over a period of time, that became to be called as Dharma. But the idea is there is an order to things in nature. There is a pattern. And Dharma is the behavior that tries to mimic that pattern. So the simplest way to understand this would be, you have the planetary system. We have life on planet Earth only because it is at the distance from sun where life is possible. If it is a little further, we will be anyways burnt. If it is a little ahead, we will not get enough sunlight for life to happen. And sun is coming up, Earth is spinning around itself, it is spinning around sun. So everybody is holding their place. This macro pattern is called Rata. That there is a pattern, there are seasons, there is this nature. And how do we mimic that stability, that behavior in social life, in individual life? So that is why I said the principle is of sustainability. You have to ask yourself, if everybody repeats what I'm doing, will this hold? If this holds, then that is dharmic. If it starts generating what we call entropy, which means that it will actually eat into the system, that is a dharmic system. So everybody doing dana, for example, if you look at the Indian society, the idea of dana, there is only grihastha, which is actually the ashrama which is performing some jobs in creating wealth. The sannyasa ashrama, the vanaprastha ashrama, and the balya ashrama are all feeding from that. But the sannyasa ashrama is contributing spiritual strength. The vanaprastha is giving what you've given, the cultural strength. Being apart, but being able to, being available if somebody needs. And the balya avastha is producing the creativity, right? Or the learning surplus that it can deploy into grihastha. So this interdependent structure, by creating coherence, is the dharmic.
Our next question is from Kamya.
जी नमस्ते, शुभ राधाष्टमी सबको, और very nice. I'm sorry I couldn't catch the whole of the lecture because I was outside, but happy to just catch this last bit. And really inspiring the way that we can think about dharma as something within the context of the modern world. I have one question, is that we're seeing a great rise in Indic consciousness across India, and not just India but abroad, where there's an increasing demand for Indic knowledge systems. More systems are forming which are rooted in consciousness of ecological protection, natural medicine, all these different things. But if we see in India, I feel that many of the organizations are very fragmented. So we have like individuals doing like different things here and there. And I feel like one of the challenges is that, whilst there's a heavy focus often on political work and the socio-political activism which is required, we see very few kind of on-ground organizations. So for example, there is one called Reclaim Temples. They are building temples, and there is People for Dharma, So I guess my question is like, how do we, how do you envision this Indic ecosystem unfolding? And do you think that, what would be your ideas on how we can bring this ecosystem more into a streamlined way of, like with everything, financial resources and everything, people, and of course the youth, right? Because for example, in England, we have this concept of a gap year. So during our gap year, we will go and like volunteer with other NGOs, and then we get, we put it on our CV, and then, it looks, we apply for jobs and things like this. So, I feel like these systems are still very nascent, like even in education, the concept of a gap year or even just entrepreneurship is still quite nascent, like the company will say, obviously, so this has no value. But I mean, so I guess it's two questions really. How do we bring, say, like voluntary work and things like this into the education system, where we can channel students from colleges and schools into these type of activities? And then secondly, how would we,
Yeah. The first thing that we should avoid is, imputing some kind of messianic goal to ourselves.
What does that mean? Sorry.
When we start thinking about, how do we integrate, how do we channel, how do we this one? We first need to spend
collective.
Yeah. We first need to spend a lot of time understanding things as they are. Right? My co-founder and friend Pankaj puts it well. Says that we just need to be the squirrel that carries whatever sand it can to build the bridge. Firstly, temperamentally, that is important. That does not preclude the need for strategy. We definitely need to think of how we can get network effects, how we can come together. And there, you already are aware of the work that Brihat does. We work with 5 stakeholders. What is the lever through which everything else can happen? That is culture and education. That's why we are in these 2 spaces. Culture is more content, direct conversations with people, what you and I are doing right now. And education, which is the more systemic way of learning and being, right? So these are the 2 areas that we've chosen for ourselves. Whoever wishes to engage in this, they have to choose those areas according to their resources and proceed. That's one. Once you are here, there are 5 stakeholders or 5 areas that we think are important to be connected. First is the policymaker. We just definitely need to engage respectfully with the political system. It's not an easy job. It's easy to disparage. It's very hard to lead. Right? So we need to understand and be a little bit more empathetic. The academic leadership, the ability to influence and work with universities. We have tie-ups with Amrita University. We have a tie-up with Chanakya University. We're working with a couple of other universities, with Chinmaya institutions we do. So the ability to actually put your head down to work and partner with institutions, not be radical to advance agenda, but to build. Third is industry. We need to tie the industry into this, show them that this knowledge system is important. Fourth is parents, and fifth is young people. All 5 need to be tied together. That's the thinking that we have. I don't have any proclamation that I have the final solution for this, but temperamentally, we should stop framing these things as how do we bring all of these things together. We just need to study. I'm not suggesting you're doing it, but how I've advanced.
So, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, would you say it's more important to approach this?
I'll leave it to Srivani if she has any other people waiting.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Shivani.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying something.
Yeah, this is a question from.
Yeah.
You unmute yourself, Shahjahan Apur.
Oh, yeah, of course. I could not hear you, ma'am, because you were on mute initially. So thank you very much. Wonderfully. I mean, to begin with, great session it was. And since my organization, Shahjahanpur Proscenium LLP, also deals with a lot of creators like aspiring actors and aspiring writers, screenplay writers. Wonderful. So we also kind of sail into almost a similar boat, if not the same one.
Yeah.
My question to you would be a little on the holistic side, sir. I could kind of gather certain parts of this conversation today, of this session. Now, I'm a grown man, right? And I've seen world, and it's not something to boast about it, just to kind of state the facts as they are today. However, when I was in my school, there was not much of an influx about all these kinds of informations, which we otherwise find, let's say, on a platform like social media, very, very handy and kind of just by our bedside.
Yeah.
And that makes me to realize that how's the output? Initially, when you start with something with a noble intention, let's say, let's cleanse the society. Yeah. How's the output not increasing or kind of getting purified? So especially speaking in terms of mental health, I don't take anybody's advice or anything. That's my personal thing. And perhaps I've learned more than by not attending the sessions of experts as I would have gained by attending the sessions of experts. Every other person is telling you something. There are books which have been written in terms of making you richer in the society.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are things. There's a pervasive literature which is telling everybody to think in one particular manner. So diversification of the schools of thought has gotten diminished over a period of time. And then again, the sad part, which is of course is my own opinion. I mean, of course, everybody has a perspective, so no offenses to anybody. Especially in terms of mental health is just a part. However, there are other schools of thought, other kind of speeches and debates and discussions which happen, let's say, on a public platform like social media. And apart from social media, also, you talk about mainstream media also, they are happening. The people are guiding people over the pivot of their problems, right? So, for example, if you don't have money, there would be 5 experts who would tell you how to grow rich. You're having problems in your relationship, there would be 7 other people who tell you how to mend your relationship. However, the irony is, despite the fact that we have a lot of intervention of these people in our society, self-fatalities, self-destruction, the glue or the cohesiveness of the society is not becoming what we otherwise have intended for, as opposed to a scenario which was there, let's say, in my school days and somewhere in the middle of 90s. It was a beautiful era. Everybody actually expressed what he felt like. There was no filtration. So is it because, so my question, I'm just coming out of my question, is it because of the fact that people who may not have the required acumen are guiding or providing some kind of ushering to the society today? Or is it because of the fact we are not the kind of right literature or the right, let's say, shoulder to cry upon or to find the right question, especially for the Gen Z generation or for this kind of a generation? Is it because of the fact that we don't have access to those kinds of means and measures and they have just gotten lagged behind? I mean, they are just, kind of faltering behind because there's somebody who's taken over the entire mechanism and telling you what is right and wrong. This is my question. Thank you, sir.
Very true. Very true. And a very pertinent and very urgent situation that all of us must engage in. Herbert Simon, what you've just mentioned is what Herbert Simon reflected on even before the age of social media. He said an abundance of information leads to a poverty of attention. We have to understand the architecture of the self. That is, when I spoke about the yogic praxis, we are a resource in some ways, right? Not in a Western economic sense, but what are our fundamental faculties? You have attention, you have memory, you have will. These are the things, right? You spend your attention, you acquire knowledge, and you are able to memorize that, and you exert your will to deploy that knowledge somewhere. This is the fundamental architecture, right? And then there are many ways to understand the sattva, rajas, tamas, then there are many ways, right? Now, the problem that you're pointing to is that there is a extraordinary overload on these things, but there is no way to increase the capacities of the human. So you have 7 opinions, but you don't have the ability to increase your memory, your attention, your will. That is where the entire, I'm sure there are a lot of professional experts here, but there is a knowledge issue in the mental health discourse itself about the fundamental truth of being human, right? The second element to this is culture. A lot of learning, if you look at this, there are 2 factors. One is the cultural evolution, and the other one is the evolutionary genetic evolution that we've had. Right? The cultural evolution, there is a rate at which cultural evolution happens, where we are able to make sense of all the changes that are happening around us, like the school example that you gave, because there, the rate of change in the environment and the rate of change in the culture was broadly okay. Rate of change in the environment is always more because there is business, technology, but culture keeps catching up, right? What has happened is in our exponential technology phase in the last 10 years, we have to understand the function of exponential technology. What happens when there is an innovation in communication technology is that one particular trend anywhere in the world has the potential to become a global trend in a matter of 3 or 4 days. Think about a few years ago how Ice Bucket happened. Some meme somewhere, and everybody across the world started mimicking it. This is the human process where we want to mimic and learn. This is innate. But exponential technology compounds that. It makes the production of that very high. So we've created technology which amplifies this, and we've defocused on the instrument. So it's a double whammy, right? So therefore, there is a governance, regulation, policy, culture issue. I'm just framing it for you the way to think about it. So fundamentally, when we say Indian knowledge systems, what are we doing? We are inverting this equation. The Indian knowledge systems focuses on the instrument. The yogic practice focuses on the instrument. It is investing in you so that your memory, your attention, your will, your focus is enhanced. Once it is done, you can then apply it to whatever. You can apply it to this information, you can apply it to technology, you can apply it to politics, you can apply it to social problems, but you are a better human potential. So whatever you see, you will be able to do better at it, right? So we've got to invert this problem and look at it as a knowledge system and fundamental reality issue. That's my take.
Yeah. Ms. Deepak, can you unmute yourself and come?
Hello. Hello, sir.
Can you come on video? Is it possible to come on video?
Yeah, it is possible. Just a second. Allow. I am visible, right?
Yeah.
I can't see you yet, but yeah, I can see you now.
Okay.
Namaste.
Namaste, Raghavji. Raghavji, I'll ask in Hindi because it's long, but I'll be quick. Okay. So yeah. So basically two issues. But जल्दी से अभी जो सर ने ही बोला कि किसी भी चीज के लिए जब मान लो पढ़ना है या लेट्स से स्पिरिचुअल उसकी तरफ भी जब कभी नेट पे देखने जाते हैं ऐसा लगता है हर कोई हर चीज के बारे में बात कर रहा है, लेकिन ऐसा लगता है कि कौन सही है कौन गलत है। एक तो ये इश्यूज है। फिर ऐसा लगता है कि लेट्स से आप टेंपल प्रीस्ट पे ही भरोसा करना शुरू करो। लेट्स से नॉर्थ इंडिया में मेरे पास दिल्ली में तो बचा नहीं है, साउथ में है, लेकिन फिर मुझे वहां पे आई एम रियली सॉरी लेकिन मुझे वहां प्रैक्टिस में नहीं दिखता। तो बड़ा सिंपल सा है कि जैसे अभी मैम ने बात करी काम्या जी ने, मैं पीपल फॉर धर्मा को भी कंट्रीब्यूट करता हूँ, रिक्लेम टेंपल को भी करता हूँ और टी.एन. रमेश को तो स्पेशली करता हूँ ताकि टेंपल वापस आ सके। लेकिन मुझे दिखता है कि टेंपल की तरफ से कोई एफर्ट नहीं है। ऐसा लगता है जैसे वो लोग ही डर के अपने धर्मा को मतलब ऐसे आगे नहीं ले जाना चाह रहे, वो डरे हुए हैं कि मेरी पोजीशन ये चली जाएगी या कुछ भी है, मैं नहीं जानता। तो लेट्स से अगर कुछ सीखना भी हो तो जो प्रैक्टिसिंग होता है, जिसने एक्चुअल प्रैक्टिस करा हो, वो ऐसा लगता है मिल ही नहीं रहा सीखने को। रेगुलरली मैं जा नहीं सकता कहीं क्योंकि घर पे काम भी होते हैं, आप समझ सकते हैं कि तो एक इशू तो यहाँ पे ये आता है कि सबसे बड़ा कि मतलब किससे पूछें अगर और किसको क्रेडिबल माने। ठीक है। दूसरा है कि जैसे लेट्स से यहाँ पे होता है कि जितने भी नॉलेज
क्वेश्चन बी आंसर्ड एंड देन यू आस्क द नेक्स्ट वन।
ओके ओके।
सो दीपक मैं इंग्लिश में आंसर करूंगा क्योंकि मेरी हिंदी थोड़ी खराब है और थोड़ी कमजोर है। तो this is a curation problem, and you and I are finding ourselves in a moment where this interest has come out in the last 5-10 years, but competencies and institutions don't come out in 5-10 years. There's a larger cycle. उनको 15-20 years लगता है. The way to approach this, एक तो अपना problem ये है, मैं मानता हूँ कि curation and knowing what is right is difficult. What can you and I do about it? There are only few scholars, there are only few temples, there are only few priests. What you're doing for supporting the larger growth of that system is good, and the system will take time. Now, what will enable them to come out and be good, right? When more and more, this is where you can apply the economic logic, in a profitable way. You need to generate the demand for this authentic knowledge. The reason that is not available is because, unfortunately, that is not economically viable today. Despite all of our efforts, we are very small, right? That is compared to the state of the global culture. So the more we increase this demand, you will see that the traditional scholars or whatever, whether it is religious or academic or intellectual, they will start getting more and more assertive about their own knowledge being their identity, not the political identity. So one way to do it long term, it's not solving your personal problem, but I'm telling you the larger matrix in which your problem will also be addressed, right? So we should never lose heart in this. We should always generate more and more demand, because systematically as a system, it is only through that demand that we can either get the better people into it, and that will solve your problem downstream. That is at a more personal level. You can get in touch with my team. आपके questions जो भी है धार्मिक मामलों में, we will try and connect you through we are also providing a curation service in some of these things. We take people to temples, we connect them. There are some traditional institutions that we can work with. जो सीमित है हमारे knowledge में, आपको अगर कुछ specific spiritual need ऐसा है, so we will try and connect you to that. So that's a small curation service that we can provide. But I want you to develop the way to think about this systematically.
I wanted to add to that, Deepak, you should also practice critical thinking. Now, someone is making a statement. First thing, your consciousness knows whether it is right or not. But if you have a doubt, you can reach out to the computers, you can reach out to people. You can reach out to people who have the authority to talk about it. You're educated, you're grown up, and have confidence, believe in yourself that you have the capacity to do it. But question. Practice critical thinking. Yeah. Okay. Over to the next question. You had another
Deepak had a
question.
second question.
Yeah. So it was about the setting up of the knowledge system itself. So I'll also speak in English. Okay. So when
आपको कैसे है?
Hindi is fine.
Okay. जब हम कहते हैं कि लेट्स से यूरो क्रिश्चियन थॉट ने ये अपने इंस्टीट्यूट सेटअप करे, उस टाइम पे नॉर्म था कि आप वॉर के थ्रू बेसिकली लोगों को इन्वेट करते थे, दैट वाज द नॉर्म, और फोर्सफुली भी आप सेटअप कर सकते थे अपने सिस्टम्स को. बट अब टाइम बदल चुका है, तो लेट्स से हम ये कह दें कि वो टॉप डाउन अप्रोच जो होती है ब्रूटल वाली, वो आप नहीं कर सकते. लेकिन फिर बॉटम अप में भी हम देखते हैं कि जैसे आपने यहाँ पे पॉइंट आउट कर दिया शुरुआत में ही कि मासेस तो स्कूल के सिस्टम के थ्रू जा रही हैं, मासेस में कभी वो डिमांड आने की ऐसा लगता है कि वही नहीं होगी, इच्छा ही नहीं होगी अंदर से, अनलेस एंड अनटिल हम जैसे छोटे छोटे साइलोज में बैठे लोग कोशिश करेंगे, लेकिन मासेस में कभी नहीं आएगी जब तक वहां पे मतलब क्योंकि सिस्टम ही इस तरीके से सेटअप है. तो आप और लेट्स से बड़े जेन्युइन कंसर्न, मे बी लेट्स से कोई बुरा नहीं है, लेकिन आज अगर आप स्कूल्स में जाके ये करने की कोशिश भी करो तो कोई भी जेन्युइन क्रिश्चियन भी जो बुरा नहीं सोचता हमारे वाले में, या फिर कोई मुस्लिम भी, वो भी ये सोचेगा कि भाई दूसरों का नॉलेज सिस्टम मुझ पे लाया जा रहा है, समहाउ आई एम लूजिंग माय आइडेंटिटी, उनको ऐसा लग सकता है. तो ऐसे टाइम पे जहाँ पे इतनी सारी डाइवर्सिटी है, जेन्युइन क्वेश्चंस भी अराइज हो सकते हैं कि भाई आप ऐसा क्यों कर रहे हैं.
So I was in Srinagar last week. I was taking sessions on Indian knowledge systems at the University of Kashmir. So the trepidation that you're talking about, the apprehension that you're talking about, and also the aggression that can come out of it. I've seen this firsthand. Well, ho sakta hai, there is no this one, and that is absolutely right. There is no this one, right? Because that distrust is there. That is why we have to take everybody's minds and everybody along towards the fundamental questions. The utility of Indian knowledge systems is not about something specific. It is valid only when it is universal and personal at the same time. It's the point that I made, right? Ultimately, it doesn't matter what religion, what caste, what state that you belong to. You have the same experience of life, that you are born, you are young and vital, you go into middle age, you have some family duties and burdens, you start getting old and you realize that you're getting old, and then you're old and die. This is the truth of life. Now, the question is, how do we make this part beautiful? Knowledge system has value only if it is able to address these questions, right? The Indian knowledge system, when we talk about, it is simultaneously the inquiry of the material along with the inquiry of the internal. जो अभी नया बुक एक आया है, Elements of Indian Knowledge System, मोहन राघवन जी का बुक है. I would recommend it to everyone. He talks about the metaphor of Ganda Berunda, the two-sided eagle. One eagle is looking out. It is the world of Indriyas. It is looking out, trying to get as much as sensory information as it can. Car, bangla, jo bhi hai wo, right? One eagle is looking inwards. The second eagle is not there in the current education system or culture. The second head of the eagle is the Indian knowledge system. Because it does not matter whether you are, whatever religion you are, whatever pursuit you have, this void that you have inside you is still real. This pain is real. So if you're able to touch that principle, then you're likely to get acceptance. Of course, within that, there will be challenges, but we should, if you're looking to take the mantle and the responsibility of a teacher, of a knowledge system, otherwise, वो आपके लिए खुद कर लो, उसमें कोई problem नहीं है. But अगर आपको दूसरों को बताना है कि this has value, then you have the responsibility of saying that gently and from a point of empathy in a way that talks to them in their personal lives.
To sum it up, you said speak to them as this is universal knowledge and not pertaining to a particular religion, and that speak to their daily concerns, to speak to their personal concerns.
Speak to the truth of human experience, right? Of course, and be strategic, be smart, all of those things are there, right? But this fundamental experience of life through time is the same for everyone, and everyone has those concerns. Today, the secular world thinks it has solutions to those problems. It does not, because there is an inner world.
And you called it Ganda Bhairava.
Ganda Berunda is the metaphor.
Ganda Berunda.
Yeah.
Berunda. This is that figure you're talking about. It's not a book.
Figure. Yeah, the book, I think it's been given in the links now. It's called The Elements of Indian Knowledge System.
Elements of Indian Knowledge System. Okay. Okay. Now, there was one statement you had made that COVID was man-made and it was a collaboration between the US and China. So is there anything to back up these statements?
Oh, there is a lot of, I'm not saying it's man-made and it came out of this one. There was a debate on the origin of COVID. Right? Okay. And that is now accepted. In fact, the person who was in charge of the entire institutions, Fauci, he was asked to resign. And there are hearings happening across Europe and US today on the origins of COVID. So it is what is called the lab leak theory, that it was a scientific experiment. Now, my question is not on the leak itself. My question is on the ethics of this research. Clearly, if they are pumping in $100 billion, to a certain degree, gain of function could be for medical usage. But there is undeniably a nexus between the pharma, military, and political institutions on this. And it is not just about COVID alone, right? This is the structure of our knowledge systems today, or our institutions today. COVID is just one example, but the fundamental lack of ethical temper in science is the real crisis that we have.
Yeah, I think I've covered all questions.
Yeah.
One more question from Kavya.
Yeah. I've missed, yes. Trishant,
Kavya, could you please unmute yourself?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. May I ask one question?
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, now we're seeing, a lot of, the way that I really appreciate the way that you guys are spreading the Indian knowledge systems within the schools, and it's really inspiring. There's also, apart from the kind of system that we live in, there's also a massive rise in communities outside of the system. So what we term as, say, New Age spirituality. And there's a massive disconnect between New Age spirituality and the ancient traditions. And then you have woke ideologies like this is Brahmanical patriarchy, or in my case, Brahmanical matriarchy. Is the kind of all those ideas are polluting the New Age movement, right? As someone who works within the system, how would you say is a good way for us to say, if someone wanted to introduce more of the authentic Indian traditions into New Age spirituality in a system, because this is also to do with corporates and industries, like you mentioned, one of your stakeholders is corporates and industries. So again, this is a thriving $1 trillion industry. So what would be some of your thoughts on that? Because at the same time, we don't want to contort or distort our knowledge, but it also needs to be packaged in a way where, how...
I think the question has the answer itself. It has to be authentic and it has to be presented well. And there are enough examples of organizations that are doing this, right? Whether we label it as New Age spirituality or this one. See, whatever you do, it has to locate itself in the society. To ask the society to change for what is, the New Age movement is not fair.
That's
society has a certain,
yeah, it's more, how do we bring more traditional origins into the modern system? It's more my question.
So there we just have to create the right programs and interventions, respecting their reality and not talking down to the audience. Always respecting the audience, understanding the space that they come from, giving them agency that they are living their lives to the best of their abilities and they have moral agency. And if you have something useful to offer, make it useful first. That's all there is.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
you. One more question. What is the difference between Manas, Buddhi and Chitta?
This is the yogic terminology. The seat of emotions or where the part of you where the emotional impulse resides is the manas. Buddhi is the discriminatory intelligence, or the faculty that is able to discriminate between the good, the bad, which is why you have to go like this. So if you look at the chariot metaphor from Upanishads, it becomes clear. And chitta is the fundamental. In a yogic sense, it is the repository of all of these things. But in a Vedantic sense, if you extend it, chitta is the substratum, that is the consciousness.
And Vedic sense, it's consciousness. What was that?
Chitta bhumi, the yogic sense, it is, in an instrument, if you're in the context that I was talking about it, chitta is the storehouse of all of your collective experiences, along with the labels and everything. So what yoga does is, when all of the raga and dvesha are stored in the chitta, in your, in your hard drive, if you will, right? You are just replaying the same raga and dvesha time and again. What yoga does through the yogic process is to cleanse this, is to keep this always light, so that it is shining forth. And when it is shining forth, the perception becomes sharper, the cognition is sharper, the memory is true. So you are going from avidya to vidya. That is the idea.
Thank you so much. You've been so patient with all our questions. For someone who's well read and well evolved, we've asked you such basic questions.
No, please don't say that. Like I said, there is no claim of being an expert, or there's only a seeking. That's all there is.
Yeah. Trishant, would you like to close the session?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank everyone who's come here and has still stayed in this session till now. Like, it's almost 1, and I'm very overwhelmed by all the information I've just received. But very happy at the same time. I thank you all for attending today's event. I thank you, Raghavaji, for giving us so much of your time and information. I can't thank you enough, actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trishant. It's been a pleasure interacting with you and knowing through this opportunity all of you at Wishwa. I wish you guys all the best.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to request everybody to please follow Instagram, visit our website, follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn for future updates and upcoming talks. I will see you again next week at 11 o'clock.
Great. I also request everyone to follow Bruhat if they can.
Yes, please. Please do follow Bruhat also on Instagram. They've got some really amazing posts and minute content that actually enables you to understand culture really well. Because our attention span has, gone down like crazy because of the reels and everything. That kind of content is more absorbable. I feel you can absorb more from that. And lastly, I'd like to request Raghava sir, could you please join into the breakout room link that you see in front of you? Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you to all the audience members for attending this event. I will see you next week again.